Typically, when you talk about draft prospects from BYU, you more often than not are used to talking about them coming into the league at 24, 25, 26 years old because they went off on a mission for a couple of years, blah, 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 blah. So they sometimes can be a little bit of an outlier because, yeah, they might sometimes look impressive, but they're also a couple of years older than their competition. In the case of Jaren Hall, he's kind of middle of the road age for this freaking quarterback class in this year's draft. My goodness. He's only in his, 25? Yeah, like, he'll be a 25-year-old rookie. He's right at the median age this year. Holy shit, Christ. But anyways, here's an example of another guy that has some experience when you're looking at quarterbacks that could come in day 3 and, maybe they sit on the practice squad initially, but then later on could become your backup on a cheap rookie scale contract. A guy like Jaren Hall could fit that bill. Although I must vent, like I often do about this, is I really find it stupid for the NFL teams to sit there and run with only 2 quarterbacks on their active roster. It's just really dumb to me. Bad roster management. Yeah, we got to have that 25th special teamer, but let's not keep one more guy for the most important position in North American professional sports. It's where coaches can overthink it and outthink themselves to the point of looking dumb. You never know. Like, you have your starting quarterback go down. Now you're down to your backup being your starter, and then who the hell is your third stringer? You're left with the rest of the crumbs. At least have a choice at who you've got. And that's the hope for somebody like a Jaren Hall, is that he can get drafted. Or if he doesn't get drafted, he could be a priority free agent somewhere and maybe sits on the practice squad initially and eventually works his way into a roster spot. Watching him and going back and studying him in 2022, I liked his ability to throw on the move to both directions. Like, he was really smooth in the way that he could square up his body, he could square his shoulders to the target, he could get his feet into position. Whether he was rolling out to the right or he was rolling out to the left, it didn't really matter. He was able to make those throws on the move. He's also a decent athlete that can extend plays, and pick up yards with his feet. When you're not the biggest guy and you don't have the greatest arm talent, you got to find other ways to get the job done. You got to find other ways to make plays happen. And he's a guy that can make some plays happen with his feet. But there's more than that when you talk about Jaren Hall as a prospect. I really liked his habit of being able to locate the check down, not always looking to just force it into traffic or trying to make the hero throw and play hero ball. He understood the system. He understood where the players were. He understood where his targets were, and he knew where he could go to hit those checkdowns. Also showed a really good understanding and a maturity when it came to throwing the ball away. And sometimes you got to throw it away and live to fight another play, right? And he did a good job of that. There's some quarterbacks in this class that demonstrated that maturity, and others that would just say, no risk it, no biscuit, fucking I'm going to throw it no matter what, and we're going to go after it. He also has a quick, compact throwing motion, which is important for a guy that doesn't have the strongest arm, is get rid of the ball quickly, because that can compensate at least a little bit, even if you're talking about fractions of a second here. It can make a difference. You can fit the ball into some tighter windows than if your throwing motion was long and you lack the velocity. He also makes some really good decisions. Like, you would think about the old kind of game manager label. Jaren Hall somewhat fits that game manager label. He doesn't take a ton of chances. He doesn't make a ton of risky throws. He will certainly try to stretch it down the field. He will try to throw it deep, but they're in good spots, in good situations. A spot where if he did throw an interception 50-plus yards down the field, it feels more like an arm punt than a really bad play. He shows some good poise and patience in the pocket in terms of being willing to allow things to play out. He doesn't immediately get scatterbrained when he gets some pressure in his face. He is able to go through his full set of progressions, which I also really like. And I thought his ball placement, that's just me being tired and immature right now. All these things, like he's stiff in the hips, ball placement. Do we realize how homoerotic scouting NFL draft prospects sounds? I mean, good Christ almighty. But his placement on his throws in the short and intermediate area is above average, at least from what I saw. So I like quite a bit about his game. Here's what I didn't like, though. He's another guy, shorter, He's a decent bulk, but he's still, barely 6 foot, barely 200 pounds. So he lacks ideal size position. He's another 25-year-old, so how high do you want to draft a guy that's that old at the quarterback position? Another thing, too, not only does he lack, big-time arm talent, big-time arm strength, he really struggles to get zip on ball throws to the sidelines. You got to be able to make those throws at the NFL level. And his throws to the sidelines, man, outside of the hash marks especially, they have to have a lot of air on them. And that just feels like pick sixes on outs waiting to happen. But it's not just the lack of arm strength. His deep ball accuracy completely sucks. Now, this is kind of a catch-22 here. And what I mean by that is he's really bad when it comes to completing the deep ball. However, he is almost so bad at it that it's not as big of a concern. And what I mean is he'll be so off the mark. Like he'll be 5 yards off to the right, 5 yards off to the left, 5 yards over his intended receiver, that a defensive back, the corner or the safety, they're not in a place to make a play on the ball either. So if you're going to miss on those types of throws, miss big, because you can just live to fight on the next down. It's certainly something he needs to get better at in terms of his timing, his anticipation, his placement on those deeper throws. But the fact that he is so bad in terms of his deep ball accuracy, and believe me, he really is, isn't the worst thing in the world because of how he does it. He's not underthrowing guys by 5 yards where everybody can come back to it and make a play on it. Like, he just freaking is all over the place, right? And that can be nice. Another thing that stands out about him, I talk about his poise and patience in the pocket. There's a flip side to that. He does struggle to recognize pressure from the edges. Like, you could see that quite a bit. He could be late to react in terms of moving within the pocket. And for a guy with as much experience as he has as a starter, a couple of years of starting experience, you would say you'd like him to be able to demonstrate a little bit better instincts and feel for his position, but he just doesn't. But the reality is this is another small, older quarterback prospect in this draft class, and we've got several of those. And I think his lack of physical tools really limits his overall upside. He is, though, a smart, experienced leader that, when we're talking about guys that you could take in round 6, round 7, or even their priority free agent, these are the types of guys that can find a way to eventually make a roster and have a long career in the NFL. Not every draft pick is going to be a freaking superstar. You got to get draft picks of all types here. And this is a guy that personally, if I'm sitting there in the 7th round, that's where I feel like about his draft value is. If I want to get a young quarterback in the room, have the potential to have another young quarterback in the wings, like if he's there, I'm certainly considering taking him. I think about Tyler Huntley, who I've kind of compared him to from a couple of years ago when he was coming out of Utah. He wasn't drafted. I thought he should have. This is a guy that came in back up to Lamar and has started when Lamar's gotten hurt. And he's not great, but he's serviceable. He can get you by for a period of time. And he comes on the cheap side from a contract standpoint. You could do a lot worse, believe me. So when I look at Jaren Hall, and frankly, outside of all of these big-name guys, it's hard for me to fully gauge and assess what the draft value is going to be for these guys. Because once you get past that top 4, you might not have another one drafted until round 4 or 5. That's very possible. But then you could have a run on these guys late. Like, I would certainly hope that he would get drafted because I think he deserves to. But if he doesn't, this is a guy that teams should be looking to scoop up. And even if they stash him away in the practice squad, because you could have at least a future long-term backup in the NFL.